Greetings and welcome once again to legalizefreedom.com. My name's Greg Moffat and this is the end of the world as you know it. The beginning of the end of the industrial age is upon us, and my guest today, John Michael Greer, will be telling us why. John is a certified Master Conserver, organic gardener and scholar of ecological history. The current Grand Archdruid of the Ancient Order of Druids in America, his widely cited blog, the Archdruid Report, which you can find at thearchdruidreport.blogspot.com, deals with peak oil amongst many other issues. In his compelling book, The Long Descent, John presents a challenging new vision of the future, traces the decline and fall of an industrial society fatally out of balance with planetary limits, and shows how personal change and local action can shape a better tomorrow. Hello and welcome, John Michael Greer, and thank you very much for joining us today on legalizefreedom.com.
Well, thank you very much for having me on.
John, we are here today essentially to talk about the end of the world as we know it. Specifically, as set out in your 2008 book, The Long Descent, which is subtitled A User's Guide to the End of the Industrial Age. Mm-hmm. Now, perhaps the listeners, you could set out an overview of The Long Descent and just your basic premise in writing it.
Okay, well, basically, there's a lot of misunderstandings about our society and our role and place in history just at the moment. A lot of people have convinced themselves that we live in the kind of very abundant, very highly supplied with technology, very lavish world with the lavish lifestyles we do, because we're smarter than anyone who ever lived before us, or because we've built up this vast amounts of information, or there are various versions of the social mythology that kind of feeds into this. But when you take a hard look at the situation, the reason that we have all of the wealth and all of the abundance, the strawberries in January, all this kind of stuff, is that we've been burning our way through the Earth's stash of fossil fuels. We've been doing it at a remarkable rate. And the consequence of this is that we've been burning it at a rate that cannot be sustained. We've reached the point at this point that roughly half the Earth's original accessible quantities of fossil fuels are basically gone now. And what that means is that supplies are beginning to run short, just a little short at this point. There will be more of that as we proceed, and the further we go, the higher the demand goes, the more the supply declines. We're facing a situation in which we can no longer maintain the industrial society that we're used to. At that point, it's a fairly rough road because, again, our entire society is geared to having things shipped across countries, across continents, around the world in container ships. Our entire society is geared to being able to replace vast amounts of human labor with machines powered ultimately by fossil fuels in one way or in the other. And you can't maintain the kind of society that we've got. You cannot maintain the size of the populations we have if you don't have that sort of lavish fossil fuel subsidy backing it up. So the long descent is the consequence of that. I call it the long descent because it's not an instant thing. It's not the kind of overnight Hollywood fantasy collapse that so many people dream about. It's a gradual process because the fossil fuels don't run out all at once.
Yes, I mean, even in, you talk about in a rapid collapse, even in like the original Mad Max and Road Warrior movies, mm-hmm. which are probably the Hollywood archetype of that sort of thing, it opens the film with a segment about, the leaders talked, but eventually, the oil ran out and the great machines sputtered and stopped, and then mm-hmm. suddenly we all started cannibalizing each other. And that was a fairly dramatic, fairly short-scale collapse. But what you're talking about, 100 years, 200 years, as we gradually move to a new world.
Mm-hmm. Well, the thing that I point out is that we actually have a very large amount of information about how civilizations sputter and grind to a halt. Most civilizations in the past have done some variant of this. They've overshot their resource base, just as we're doing. And they've been through the same process that we're facing on different scales with different technological bases, sure. But it's the same process, and it usually takes between 100 and 300 years. it's very fashionable to insist that, well, we're different, we're special. But I see no reason to think that. My working guess is that we're in the early stages of a process of decline that's going to last far beyond our lifetimes.
Now, the situation regarding the oil supply that you referred to is basically known as peak oil.
Mm-hmm.
And for the technical insight into that and all the numbers, people can, for the time being anyway, can go online and kind of look
mm-hmm.
that up for themselves and make up their own mind. But one mm-hmm. thing that can't be, how can I put it, manipulated or twisted or changed in any way is the fact that everything, as you referred to just a moment ago, in our modern world depends on oil, and mm-hmm. oil itself depends on oil for its production and transportation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if I look around where I'm sitting right now, I mean, not only is all the plastic and all the systems that you and I are using to talk to each other, there's a plastic water bottle here. Everywhere I look is plastic, which is all oil. And if it isn't plastic, it's some other form of semi-synthetic material which has been made from oil, and oil to transport it, oil to manufacture it in the first place. I mean,
mm-hmm.
you can't move 1 inch in this world without coming across oil as part of a process.
Very much so. And of course, all of the other energy sources that we've got are also dependent on oil at this point. Coal, for example, is not being excavated at this point and shipped using coal-fired equipment. It's being mined with diesel machinery. It's being transported on either diesel trains or diesel trucks. And this is also true of the various green energies, of which there's been so much hoopla. Okay, wind turbines are all, these green energies, so we're told. But in fact, they're manufactured on equipment that is powered ultimately by fossil fuels. They're made of materials that are mined, prepared, synthesized, what have you, for either using fossil fuels or directly from fossil fuels, like fiberglass, for example. The components are transported, assembled, set up, burning a lot of diesel power, and the continual maintenance that they require. Again, you've got to have somebody able to go out there in a truck, and that truck is not powered by a wind turbine. That truck is powered by oil. The consequence of this is that most of what we're being sold these days as, quote, green energy, unquote, is simply a roundabout way of burning more oil.
Yeah, it's just a question of what, it's not as direct. It may not send smoke into the air at the point of use, but it doesn't mean that it was any less dependent on oil. And of course,
exactly.
Anybody who looks at the renewables situation right now, whether you're a critic or whether you're an advocate, I mean, it's clear that they're nowhere near. I mean, they're fulfilling 1% and 2% sort of amounts here and there of energy requirements. And if you then look at what would be required in theory, even if it could be done in practice, but in theory to get them up to providing a useful percentage of our energy, you would then say, okay, that requires us to build however many turbines or however many photovoltaic cells. And what would that take in terms of our current energy use? And the net result would be that in order to get renewables up to something like a useful percentage, we'd have to divert oil in massive quantities away from things that we use it for every day.
Exactly. This is one of the things that has been increasingly a source of worry in the peak oil community, because most of certainly the governments, the advocacy organizations, the corporations that are out there selling wind turbines and photovoltaic arrays and things like that, nobody's talking about how much energy would it actually take to make these potential future energy sources possible. There's always an upfront cost. When there was all that talk a few years ago about the hydrogen economy, we're all going to power our cars on hydrogen. Okay, fine. First of all, nobody was talking about how we were going to get the electricity to break apart water to manufacture the hydrogen. But the other problem is that let's say you want hydrogen-powered cars. Think of how many trillions of pounds and dollars, and choose your other currency units, over the last 100 years have gone into building the infrastructure that gets petroleum. From the well to the refinery to the forecourt where it's sold to the user, and all of that stuff. All of that would have to be replaced from the ground up with a comparable hydrogen infrastructure, because you can't put hydrogen into an ordinary gasoline pump. You can't ship it over a petroleum pipeline. The whole infrastructure would have to be bought and paid for before you could actually replace a significant fraction of your cars. And that immense overhang of money, of labor, of resources, and especially of energy is something that our society can no longer afford to do.